Okay, hi everyone. I'm just closing some windows and moving Slack windows so that I don't expose like stuff that we don't want to have on the recording, like private messages and don't load folders. And Nico asked me why the bundle size in one of his MRs increased like dramatically, and we're going to have a look how, if you get such a report, what does IP actually do, and what can you do to maybe have a first understanding of what actually happened. So I'm just sharing my screen, and this is the merge request. So you can see here we have a report. The bundle size here increased by 400 kilobytes, and on this page, and we're basically just adding a few GraphQL things. And it seems really weird that the size increased that much. So let's dive into it. So generally, if you have this bundle size report, there is the full report button, which gives you a nice similar view to the markdown comment. But what's really essential is that here you have a list of all the chunks that are actually loaded on that page. And if you are
these sizes all the chunks, or is it just that single chunk?
So that's the thing. So basically, if you're going on the pages project settings CI/CD show, all of these chunks are loaded, and the size to the right is everything except the main chunk. And this is historically, when we started doing the bundle size review, maybe we should change it in the future, is because the main chunk is now really small. Back when we started, the main chunk was like 8 megabytes, and it was really confusing if you had like a chunk that grew from 8 megabytes to 8.5 megabytes, and you're like, why is this, or like the entry point, right? Terminology is hard. It was a bit confusing, but now, given that the main chunk is smaller, we might be able to add it. Maybe we should just change it so that if you have one entry point, everything is considered to the size of the entry point. Because if you actually look at the size of the largest entry points, you have to add the size of the main chunk in your mind, right? So we're not loading 10 megabytes here. We're loading 12 megabytes. And then on the other hand, we're also not loading 12 megabytes, but it's less because this is the raw size and not the parsed size. The parsed size would be very interesting, but it's very hard to get. Parsed size would be how much characters is the abstract syntax tree, right? And then we have the gzip size, which is like how much stuff goes down the pipeline. Okay. So actually what would be interesting is the parsed size. But as these all kind of depend on each other, if we send 4 megabytes down the wire and it's 8 megabytes parsed, and the raw size is 10 megabytes, it's still like larger is larger. So, right, like this is obviously about 10 times as large as one that is just 1 megabyte. Are we
observing, so you mentioned GraphQL. We're saying we actually load GraphQL for every, we don't load in the main bundle. We don't have an individual chunk. It's in all specific page chunks.
So yet now also some more things. What are these chunks, right? So the main chunk is the chunk that's loaded on every page. And we have these other chunks. So you can, for example, here see, this is basically the chunk that's loaded, that loads the stuff that's just on the page. And I'm putting air quotes here for reasons we get into in a second, and you can see what happens. And these are basically the commons ones are shared chunks. So you, for example, see, hey, the pages project licenses index and pages project settings CI/CD apparently share some code, and that shared code has been put here. So if you actually visit this page and then go to that other page, you know, and this whole chunk, let's say, is 1.5 megabytes, you don't need to download 1.5 megabytes again, right? Mm-hmm. So this is basically like the thing of cacheability and where do stuff end up. And all these common chunks are basically chunks that are magically generated by Webpack.
Got it.
But because we have a lot of entry points, it might be that these common chunks are sometimes small, and it might, and this is what's happened here, it might lead to a situation where certain things don't end up in common chunks that potentially could end up in common chunks, and in this case, GraphQL.
Can I ask you a question here?
Yeah.
So would it be wise for us to lean towards having really small entry points that import, and like having lots of small modules rather than having like one large entry point? Like for this, the fact that we are kind of chunking things up like that, have we observed any kind of effect based on entry points that end up having lots of small modules versus like, okay, we just have one huge index.js file or something?
So a few things here. One of the problems is that we recently changed it, because before we just had like 4 or 5 common chunks. So per page, and now we have a higher maximum because of HTTP2. It doesn't really matter. It's actually good if we have a lot smaller chunks that get delivered over the pipeline, because those chunks will those chunks can be delivered in parallel, and computers with more than one CPU can already start parsing the multiple files in parallel, right? There's obviously a downside with the magic here, and this is what we're going to see in a second. I think it doesn't really matter. I mean, in the end, if you deliver 1.7 megabytes of JavaScript on this page, either in one file or in 10 files or in 5 files, in the end, you're delivering 1.7 megabytes of JavaScript. The only thing that I'm concerned here with the GraphQL stuff is, hey, we use GraphQL in more pages. It would be smarter if we have one chunk where all the GraphQL stuff ends up, because if you navigate through GitLab a lot, you will actually be able to reuse that GraphQL chunk, right?
Yeah. So let me ask one more question. Are we planning on putting it in its own chunk, or are we going to put it in the main chunk?
So I wouldn't want to put it in the main chunk. Actually, my goal would be in the future, or the general goal is the main chunk should be as tiny as possible, because yes, if 90% of the pages are loading GraphQL or Vue or whatever, right? It's cool if it's in the main chunk, but still sometimes you have pages you go to, like let's say, for example, I don't know if it's the reality, I'm just making up an example.
Yeah.
If you are on the login page, and the login page is just a normal form without any JavaScript, imagine it were like that. I don't know if it is, or a 404 page. Why would you need to load, if you on the 404 page load the main chunk, because the main chunk is loaded on every page? Why would you want to load GraphQL on a 404 page or the sign-in page if you don't need it there, right? So
and that makes sense. And it sounds like the cost is pretty low to put it in its own chunk.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly. So what have I done? I have opened the compile production assets one, or maybe even easier is you can go to the bundle size review job, and we should link it at some point. But the bundle size review actually has like the markdown that gets put in, and the HTML page that we already looking at here, right? The comparison one. And you can see there's a bundle report one, and we should just add a link. Because the bundle report is the one, and I'm increasing my font size because people were complaining about it before. And I'm just going to open the bundle report in a new tab. So the thing that I then...
Oh my goodness.
So you can see in total, all of our JavaScript assets across GitLab are currently 93 megabytes.
Oh no, why is Monaco so big?
Yeah,
this is before GZip, right?
So this is, for example,
an example. What did you say, Nico?
This is before GZip, yeah?
This is before GZip.
Oh,
GZip is like 11.6 megabytes across all of the JavaScript, right? But even past, you can see that Monaco is quite big. And so, for example, the problem that we have here with GraphQL is the problem that we had before with Monaco and eCharts, and that's the reason why we put Monaco and eCharts into a bundle, because it's like, hey, even if one is used in snippets and the other is used in the web IDE, it probably makes sense if there's just like one bundle. So the thing that I usually do here is I deselect everything. I select the main one, and we can save us some time. I basically just copy the file names here, search for it, and enable it. And you can see that some of the comment chunks are actually quite small, right? And let's save us, adding 10 of these, because if we add the last one, we actually see, aha, Apollo cache, Apollo client, view Apollo. And if I'm looking here, okay, 73, 98, 56 seems pretty reasonable that this is the 400 kilobytes that we're seeing, because we need to look at the raw, the stat size, the unparsed size, right? And here's Apollo util. So we can see that all in all, it seems like, I mean, actually all of the new modules here, more or less, right? Or most of the modules here is like, hey, and okay, this is pretty interesting. And if we turn on all chunks again, we can just search for view Apollo. And before we would find it in the main.js, but main.js is really tiny now. So you can see, okay, apparently like there are a bunch of chunks that, have view Apollo. And, like static site editor, CI/CD show, SAST configuration, whatever. And obviously it's not bad. The only thing, because it will just work and you will download the JavaScript and so on, the thing is bad is like, hey, if I go to the milestones show page and then I go to whatever other page like SAST configuration or CI/CD show.
Well, this includes also the GraphQL package and just anything anything we might be using in the future for it. There is an opportunity for, here is a box that really like should just live on its own, because and that makes sense.
And the good thing is, if you have that box, by the way, is like, because we recently changed how Webpack compiles assets. Before Webpack, these hashes were unique for each compile, so there isn't long-term caching. But if we actually end up putting view Apollo, GraphQL, and the related stuff into one bundle, and assume we don't update it for 3 months or something, there's even the added benefit that this thing might be cached for 3 months, right? While if it ends up in the project settings CI/CD show bundle chunk, I'm always saying bundle, but I mean chunk. If I change one line in our code, right, you would need to download the whole GraphQL stuff again as well, right?
Wow.
So
does this brings any consideration when we update one of those things that are in these common boxes? So
yes.
if we have, do we need to do a special procedure for it to be sure?
No. This will just happen automatically. So for example, like, I don't know how often we update eCharts. I assume it's not that often. So just for fun, we could go back, and this is actually something that, long-term cacheability is not a big concern of GitLab. Because I don't know even which kind of cache headers we serve. So it could even be that our cache headers say 10 minutes anyway. I don't know. Would be
we even include like the checksum is in the URL, like, right?
Yes. Yeah, we include the checksums in the URL, but also I think there are e-tag headers. How are they called? So let's have a look. For example, application main.js, right? So cache control, max age. Oh, this is a really long max age. So it is definitely beneficial to have long-term caching. But I mean, it's fine, right? Because as soon as you update view Apollo, the next deployment on gitlab.com will have a new hash in the file name. It will also have a new e-tag, because e-tags are based on the contents of the file, and it will just work and people get the updated bundle. We had a problem in the past, like 3-4 years ago, that, basically this didn't happen, so that the browsers, were getting an old main.js, or you had cached an old main.js and nobody told the browsers, hey, you need a new main.js, and then the people ran into errors because the other code changed, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
one more question.
Yeah. Sure, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. So I have to admit that this is like the first time I'm looking at the bundle analysis stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. But I'd be curious to know, what do we do for Axios? Because that seems to have a similar usage of it's something that's spread across our application that's used everywhere. And it makes sense kind of being in its own chunk. But
so Axios actually ends up in the main chunk, and this is probably really, so main chunk is a bit stupid.
Sure, and it just sounds like the general commons like just contains, and that makes sense. I was just curious though.
So let's have a look at the main chunk, because the main chunk is really, it's the thing that's stupid about the main chunk is that it's loaded on every page. It contains our general bootstrapping on every page. So we generally try to remove as much as possible from the main chunk, right? And we are even some things, and I think the reason why we had GraphQL in the main chunk before is I think obviously there's not one here. Like, I think these popovers are using GraphQL. I'm not 100% sure, but something uses GraphQL that's potentially on every page. We just made it so that it's loaded asynchronously, only I think if like one of these elements exists. And this is the reason why it isn't in the main bundle per default anymore. And it could potentially happen to Axios as well if we don't do a single Axios call anymore, right? Or it could actually happen to jQuery. If we remove from main.js, remove jQuery initialization, suddenly jQuery might pop up at all the pages that are using jQuery, right? And some newer routes that completely don't use jQuery might not have jQuery anymore.
I can still have it when I open the console and I can do $, and I'm like, okay, they're using.
Yes, this is a big problem still, and this is what we're slowly trying to get rid of. Same with Bootstrap, same with we want to have Vue in a smaller bundle, right? And I mean,
it's looking like Vue is a little bigger than jQuery.
Yes,
maybe we should be trying to
get rid of Vue in favor of jQuery. Yeah. No, the reason why Vue is relatively large here is at the moment we still add a version of Vue that also has a live template compilation, because we sometimes create templates in HAML, which we shouldn't do, security and so on. Yes, still, I just deleted a few today.
And
the problem, this is also one of those unfortunate problems where it's like, hey, we cannot switch to this smaller Vue thing until the last one is actually removed, right? Similar like Font Awesome, like we cannot get rid of the Font Awesome font unless we have removed every single icon, right? So all of these efforts of removing Font Awesome at the moment don't yield any performance benefits until we have removed the last one. Same with Bootstrap, right? We cannot get rid of Bootstrap until we have removed the very last tooltip.
They're all contributing to the potential performance benefit.
Exactly.
Hey, Natalia, Vue 3, is there a bundle size change just for fun?
I think it's smaller, right? It's smaller and more performant. Yeah.
It's smaller and it's more performant, and if we will be able to switch to composition API, at least partly, it will be even smaller because it grows when you have this syntactic sugar we call an options API, which we use right now over the composition API. But this is just a dream. We will never switch to composition API completely. Still, bundle size is smaller.
Maybe we don't say never, Natalia.
I know that some of our experts are strongly against composition API already. Yes.
Well,
I even know names. They're on my blacklist.
Sounds like we have a good reason to, because then we could do your blacklist. Sounds like we have a good reason to, because it has a smaller bundle size. So,
if we remove Vue from the main bundle, which page is just the position API will benefit it, and which not correct?
We have Vue in every page, right? Like,
no, that's not entirely true. We have pages that are just static, and we theoretically still load Vue.
Like some wikis. wikis are not had view outside of one model.
But like even if we did even if I was running it locally, like the performance bar is in every page, and that's a view app. Like I think it doesn't make
that's the reason why we now load the performance bar asynchronously. So if we would have view in a separate bundle, it would actually, oh, you want to load the performance bar? Okay, let me grab view for you and the performance bar code and bring it together.
Okay.
And often this is like an overhead, especially if then view is cached, is an overhead of 10 milliseconds, right? And also one thing is the more stuff there's in the main bundle, again, we change one line of the main bundle, we get a new main chunk, while if the view, which we maybe update every 2-3 months or whatever, could be a long-term.
Yeah. But certainly you can't just like chunk everything, right? Like that's like so what's
I mean that's let's look into the config, okay?
Okay, yeah, go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry. I appreciate the discussion. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, I kind of agree with you. The thing is, we really trust. So the thing is, we really trust Webpack to do its thing in a smart way. But the crazy thing is, we have 328 entry points, and there's bound to be. Then we have stupid things that skew our views of entry points. So for example, if I'm here seeing a lot of similar sizes, and if I see like the names of those bundles, I assume that this actually could just be one entry point, right? But the way how our entry points are structured, there's no deduplication. Similar, for example, with all the pipelines views, right? So like we have one entry point for each of the pipelines views. And so Webpack also basically things like this code is, if there's one line that's shared just between those 7 files, right? Webpack think, oh, this file is really important because it's, queried 7 times, even though in reality, we actually just have it once.
That's interesting.
These are a few of the downsides with the Webpack smartness. And Webpack, just looks at the current snapshot of dependencies and code that you have. Webpack doesn't know, hey, it would be smart to bundle view in a different bundle because you folks update view just every 3 years. Let me just put it in a different chunk for you. And this is what we basically need to define ourselves.
I think it'd be a lot of fun to, dive into some of the heuristics that Webpack is using to figure out how to slice things and maybe contribute upstream for more variables we can give it to.
Yeah.
Are you sure you want to get into that, Paul?
It'd be fun. I don't know. I think it'll take a long time probably, but.
So and the good thing is though, the config is rather simple.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, maybe we can be smart ourselves and don't need the machines to be smart and define a few things.
Okay. And that's a good point.
Right.
All right.
So where do we have it? It's somewhere here. Here we have it. So here you can see we have these cache groups. So there's the split chunks plugin. This is the thing that splits the chunks. And there we have a definition of Monaco, e-charts, security reports, vendors, comments. These are all the chunks, that are ending up in all of the things. Common and comments. Now I'm a bit confused myself. Okay, and this is like the stuff that ends up in, this is the main chunk. Yes, common. So this is a bit confusing. Comments are the different ones that are split between the pages, and the common chunk, so common between everything, is the chunk is the main chunk. And you can see we basically have a really smart heuristic. It's like, hey, everything that's on 90% of the pages is going to end up on the main chunk.
Oh, cool.
So if we were using GraphQL on 90% of our entry points, it would be in the main chunk. Or we load it in main.js
chunk though, right? It is in the main chunk, right? Or it's not in the main? Oh, okay. I thought you said something about it being in there. Okay.
It was in the main chunk until earlier. So the thing is, and it's really good that we have Natalia on the call. What we would probably do here is like, I would just, create a new chunk that's called GraphQL. I would give it a priority of 16 because I think it's more important than Monaco. Priority basically just says which rule is going to be taken. So if in the future we use GraphQL 90% of the page, on 90 1% of the pages, it would end up in the main chunk again. Otherwise, right now, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could probably make it higher priority to force it, but let's just, try this for now. We can iterate on it and let Mike review the merge request, because I talk all day and he actually has better understanding of these things. So name and should be pretty clear, right? This is just how it's going to be named. This chunks all basically just does, because there are async chunks, if you have the dynamic import, and there are the static chunks, and chunks all just says, hey, doesn't matter if like something async uses the GraphQL stuff or something sync uses the GraphQL stuff, give them both the same chunk. Test is just going to be the thing that, test is just going to be the thing that, where we're going to cry because we have to write a regex.
That's fine.
And I think we can just copy the test from here. And now I would need all the package names. And my idea would be that these are view Apollo.
Can we just say anything that includes Apollo?
Yeah, I think it's a good
Anything that
idea.
includes Apollo, anything that includes Apollo, anything that includes GraphQL, because we also have GraphQL and GraphQL tag.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
And Immer. We also have Immer, which is not Apollo, neither GraphQL, yeah.
Okay, Immer. Then we have dot. Okay, this is going to be a bit tricky. So we're going to have like something that is not a slash, a backslash, or a slash. And there we can have multiple ones, right? Then we have Apollo. Then we going to have the same
You mean
thing.
anything that's not a slash, so you want to do the caret thing at the front of your character selector thing?
Yep, you're right. So star any characters, Apollo. Just out of spite, I'm going to create a package that has Apollo in its name, and it's just a list of Greek deities.
That's
And
good.
no, just kidding. Apollo, what was the other stuff?
GraphQL,
right?
And it's the same thing. And I would even,
An or.
what
Why
you
don't you put an or? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say you could put those things on the outside. And what we could even do to be kind of crazy is put, if we really want Emmer, we don't want to do anything out. Like we don't want to do the wild card for Emmer. We can end Emmer in a slash, and begin it with a slash, so that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know what you're saying. So you're basically, yeah. I mean, to be honest, like I'm a bit confused that we even have the backslash slash anymore here, because the thing is that, I know, is this just escaping?
Because it's any character that's not that.
Yes, I know, but the thing is that we have the backslash for Windows support, but to be honest, like half of the other parts of this file, don't even use it. So
you could also, rather than doing anything that's not a slash, we can also just say anything that's a word or a dash, and that might be a little bit more readable.
Anyway,
yeah.
Let's just go for consistency here.
GraphQL there.
GraphQL, you're saying, right?
It's beautiful.
Okay, so I think that's it, to be honest. The only question now would be like production. Now let's find, no, this is rake assets, node and production. You see.
Are we able to run the same, are we gonna be able to like run the same job?
Yes.
Cool.
I think it's even yarn run. Let's see how it's named. I think it's even called Webpack prod. Yeah. And we won't get the nice bundle size analysis, but we will get, we can just look which files are going to be generated, and then we can have a check that those files are what we expect them to be, right?
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So the catalyst for us making this change was we saw that bundle size increased, and it increased because GraphQL was being included.
Yes.
And we realize all of these entry points are including GraphQL. We should put this in its own chunk. And so if we see bundle size increase, and it's not because of a new library or something like that, but it's because, okay, here's just a common thing that's kind of huge, maybe we should put that in its own chunk.
So the thing is, and this is where the bundle size analysis is actually still right, even with that change, we're going to have a new chunk that's about 400 kilobytes. And that new chunk will still increase the bundle size of that page.
But there's a good chance that it's going to be cached, right? Or already loaded.
Yeah, it's going to be cached. It's not, unless you always just visit the CI/CD settings that you're changing, and it's the only task you do with GitLab, you will have the benefit that the GraphQL should.
How would I see that while we're waiting for Webpack to run? How would I see that where, because there is just that one number that says this is the sum of all the chunks. How would I see, okay, it wasn't actually the entry point chunk. We actually added a chunk or something like that.
That's a really, really good call out. The problem is we have so many files and it's really hard to distinguish, and we could potentially, what would be really interesting, and I don't know if it could be done, it probably could be done, is if we really compare and say, hey, these are the new files in your diff, right? So the 400 kilobytes are coming from GraphQL, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The only way how you could have done it is essentially opening, at the moment, the bundle report for the MR and the bundle report for master, and compare what is the difference between these chunks, which is sometimes tricky because the chunks might change because of the Webpack automatics, right? Yeah. So it's just a little bit of experience and looking into it. And I think the first thing to just look at these chunks and for example, this obviously doesn't do anything. Like looking at this chunk and be like, hey, it's a bit weird, like, because I expect this chunk to be rather tiny and just contain the page specific code. Why does all this stuff end up here, right?
There's one, Apollo cache in memory. Oh, but that's an Apollo thing we're catching up.
Yes, Apollo.
Oh man, we're about to catch all of it.
I don't know what Zen observable is. I assume that is some polyfill. So this might even make sense to look into. Why is this polyfill added?
This is not a polyfill. This is an implementation on which Apollo cache in memory works. It should be a peer dependency of Apollo cache in memory. If it's not a peer dependency, we should add it as well, because they have their own implementation of observables. It's not a RxJS observables, it's Zen observable. Yeah. Sorry, for some reason I thought it should be included into Apollo cache in memory, but it isn't. Okay.
But shouldn't this already, so wait, when I say, hey, we're going to cache these things, wouldn't it also cache their dependencies?
Nope.
Oh.
This is, for example, like with the eCharts one. With the eCharts, you're like, hey, eCharts and zrender, right? Zrender is eCharts SVG rendering library. Yeah. Or for example, if Monaco would have external dependencies, you would do the same thing.
Yeah, so that seems like something Webpack, maybe we're not communicating to it the way we should, like, because that seems like something they should be able to do. And I don't want to necessarily couple myself to packages that are outside of my package JSON. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes, Apollo. I'm just looking for TS invariant.
But you kind of mentioned like Webpack knows like, hey, this line of code is only used here. Like, I feel like
it could be. I'm a bit unsure about the observable. It could be.
Could we try it without? We're already trying it without it, and then let's see. Okay, that sounds like a good idea. I need to step away for 1 minute. I'll be right back. Thanks.
That's good because Webpack still compiles for more than 1 minute. Yeah, that's the only downside of testing this Webpack stuff locally, is like it takes so much time.
Still faster than the pipeline.
Yeah, you're right. It's like Also, the screen share is not helping. I'm just going to stop my screen share for a second until this thing is compiled. Just experience. Also stop my GDK. Yeah.
Should we have a procedure where when we see that during maintainer or reviews and we see a big increase, we should, I don't know, open an issue for you to look at, or just being...
I mean, I'm going to be on parental leave soon, so pinging Mike is also helpful. And I mean, sometimes it also, the problem is that I think an issue would make sense, right? Especially if we want to iterate and develop a feature. I think the only thing where you need to be like, stop, I'm not going to merge this MR, is if you have a really sudden increase on main.js, for example, right? If you had a 400 kilobyte on main.js, I would say, hey, let's try to figure out what happened here, because this is a blocker because it loads on every page. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're currently in this MR changing a route that, I don't know, probably someone visits once a year. So 400 kilobytes more or less, probably not a big problem, but it actually is, as right now, and every time I see a big bundle size increase, it's because of something different, right? Yeah, because sometimes dependencies are pulling in other stuff that's larger than expected. We had that recently with JS YAML, because JS YAML ships a complete JavaScript parser for whatever reason. The reason is actually stupid, not stupid, but like you can serialize JavaScript objects into YAML, which you should not do. And what save load and save dump doesn't do, right? There's load and dump and save load, which doesn't do the JavaScripty stuff. But yeah, because that package is not tree shakeable, you end up with a whole copy of an AST parser. Yeah, and I mean that's to be honest, like the many benefits GraphQL has, and I never participated in discussion, and I don't want to step on any toes, but luckily all our toes are short. GraphQL is amazing. What really would be amazing if browsers shipped GraphQL support by themselves, so that you don't, need to include, like looking at it right now, that you don't need to include the whole parser and stuff yourself, right? Similar to, I mean, the one big benefit of JSON is that, every browser just supports it by default, and you don't need to care about, getting your own parser in and so on and so on.
So that's kind of related to the original dream of like having your third-party things coming from a CDN. Like when jQuery was around, it was like, oh, all of your clients that are using jQuery, they can load on this page, and it's the same jQuery that's on this page, and it's like, because it's all cached from this centralized CDN. But what probably doesn't work there is that it's not a browser, it's standard, and so everyone's still doing their own stuff. It would be neat if there was a way for me to cache. I would love to cache something by like a checksum and a name across the whole, not by URL, but like GraphQL with this sum, we can load it everywhere. Like that would be really sweet on the browser.
I mean, the first thing when that fell apart is like, hey, here's a different version. And then if every web page, one is like loading view 2.6.0, the other 2.6.11, the other 2.6.12. And this is where it already falls apart, and then suddenly, network speeds are also now different. It built the thing. Network speeds are now different and faster, and
maybe we shouldn't be writing so much JavaScript.
Yes, I just created a merge request that deletes 1,300 lines, and I'm so happy about it.
Oh wow! Of JavaScript?
Mostly JavaScript, but also unused HAML views.
Speaking about different versions of Vue, potentially there will be a situation where we'll have two versions of Vue included, and will it be possible to have two different views around with like aliases? Because I don't believe we can migrate at once.
I think this is perfectly the way I would probably do it, and I don't know how Vue 3 works at the moment, but the way how I would probably do it is I would just create a second package that is basically just a proxy for Vue, right? So something like, oh no, I think Vue 3 already uses @Vue, right? So it's a different namespace than the normal Vue, right?
Yes,
Like,
it uses, but it was like this before, and then unfortunately the name of the package is still Vue without @Vue.
It's just Vue with a version bump.
It's just Vue.
You could you could do one. We could introduce it under our own package name, but then reference it by URL, not by version or something. So we could just alias it kind of like that.
Go back to
Vue 3.
Dino.
Doesn't Vue 3 have like a compatibility mode?
It will in December,
okay.
probably.
Okay.
I hope so. And compatibility mode, I mean, this is for Internet Explorer, because if compatibility build is for IE 11, but there will be also in between migration build, which will be 2.7. We will probably upgrade to this one because it's backwards compatible, but also has deprecation warnings.
Do we know? Oh, sorry. Can
okay, sorry.
So I think the biggest we could do it. We would just need a good migration path to actually migrate most of our Vue code over, right? And I think the biggest problem will stem from things like with Vue 3, there are still single file components, or we would likely still be using them for some use cases, right?
Nothing changed in this.
Okay, exactly. So this would actually be a problem in our case, because if you now have a bunch of Vue files, how would Webpack, for example, know, hey, this is a Vue 2 file and this is a Vue 3 file, right? And stuff like that. So we might need to end up with single file components that are named .Vue 3 or something. Yeah. And, you know, we might, the hardest thing for us will be, gosh, we need to maintain 2 versions of GitLab UI. And
yeah, I already voiced this. GitLab UI and tests are the major blockers.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to start migrating away from GitLab UI. I'm sorry. I'm stepping on short toes.
Completely fine. I agree with you.
To create components just over Bootstrap, not Bootstrap Vue, because right now it's still weird, right?
That's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, there was a guy on Twitter saying that we should roll out our old Vue UI library.
But I mean, this idea about wrapping just Bootstrap, not Bootstrap Vue, is from one of our maintainers.
Yeah.
To be perfectly blunt, the idea and why I pushed for GitLab UI in a separate repository and wrapping Bootstrap Vue was like, hey, if we don't change the API of GitLab UI, actually whether you wrap Bootstrap Vue or wrap something else doesn't really matter. So obviously we could just start working and completely remove Bootstrap Vue from GitLab UI and just have
I would be happy.
That's a good call. And I think it is really nice that we have all these adapters, and that's already in place is really nice. But what's a little scary is we haven't been explicit with the adapters. And so there's a lot of implicit behavior of Bootstrap Vue that we depend on. So our API, we haven't necessarily totally defined it. It is still coming from Bootstrap Vue, but we can, I think probably the first migration step, if we were seriously considering this, would be stop implying the API from Bootstrap Vue. We need to do explicitly passing props through whatever. So we harden our API.
And to be honest, like we haven't been good ourselves when it comes to stable APIs, right? Like, if I just
like new button.
Yes, first new button is a whole story, and I mean it's fine because iteration. But also, you know, every time I look at the version number of GitLab UI, and it's like, oh yeah, now we're at 72. Interesting. Which is fine, but you know. Also maintaining a UI library is something completely different, right? And I don't envy the Bootstrap Vue guys at the moment as well, because it's like, shoot, Bootstrap 5 coming out, Vue 3 coming out, right? It's like...
Oh yeah, actually the author was kind of surprising because there was an issue asking, do you plan a migration to Vue 3? And they're like, yeah, we are working on this. And yesterday they fired, like, we started working on migrating the library. And the code of Bootstrap View is like completely view-free and friendly.
That's gonna
maybe in a year.
Yes. I mean, to be honest, like I know a company that has quite some money in the bank and uses Bootstrap View and has like 60 front-end engineers. What was their name? Anyway, yeah, you know, it's like,
you know, this company also
That's
uses Vue and like never sponsored Vue in any way.
To be honest, like given the state that Vue is in, I would rather have us invest in the ecosystem. Like we've run into the limits of the test utils before.
Let's buy Vue test utils and let's maintain it ourselves.
I'm so stoked that you're saying this, Natalia. This was my idea, and Natalia was like, "No, there's a community there."
I told you, I regret this.
Okay, so people, we can see it worked.
This finished, and so you're walking through the stuff right now.
So I don't have the nice bundle size analysis here locally and stuff. So I'm just, you know, I just opened the JS map for it, like the how's it called? The map file. And I just searched in it for Apollo, and seems reasonable enough to me.
Can you do a search for the observable stuff? Like, was it called?
But did you rerun after you added the query? Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. It's hard to guess. I would say let's just push it and be a bit more explicit about the Zen observable and have it in there.
No, but it was there. I saw it Zen.
Yeah, it was there.
You saw it Zen.
So just because, when I'm looking at this map and I see an import, that doesn't necessarily mean that Zen is in here. It just means it's still referencing Zen, right? So I need to start saying like it defined Zen.
Let's do it differently. Let's look at the project settings CI/CD show thing pages.
See if Zen is there.
Yes, see if there's anything here or how large that file is, because projects or project. What
really?
was it?
It's 5 already. Holy guacamole.
Projects settings CI/CD show. Okay, things here. Copy relative path. How large is this file now? 70 kilobytes. Seems a lot more reasonable than 500 or 238 or whatever.
How big is that? How big is just that index.js block that's over there in the purple screen on the right of your screen?
This one?
The concat. Just if you go to the right, if you get outside of node modules, how big is that little block? The not the far right.
This one.
Yeah.
What is this, by the way?
71 kilobyte. Yeah.
Yeah. So it took everything out, right?
Yes, it took almost everything out. Could be that still some GitLab UIs in there or something, but yeah.
There is Vuex probably in there, but it's still to be removed.
I think Vuex is probably, if we actually look here, Vuex is. By the way, we're really smart that we're looking at this bundle, because it makes no sense because I didn't branch off your branch. So we will never find GraphQL in here.
But look at design management, for example.
Don't look at design management.
No, so which one do we have here?
The IDE has GraphQL too, so you can see if the IDE has GraphQL out.
Pages IDE. Okay, so let's look at Pages IDE. IDE Pages. Oh, I don't alphabet very well sometimes. Pages G.
These don't. Oh yeah.
Pages IDE. Apollo. I mean, no import.
There's imports.
There's imports. Yeah, imports is fine. I mean, maybe I should look at the size of it and just, you know, copy relative path. I think the easiest actually will be, and I'm now angry at myself that I just didn't push while we did the thing. 470 kilobytes. Pages IDE. Where do we have pages?
There.
Yeah, seems smaller.
Megabyte.
Seems smaller. Yeah, I mean, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just push it and see what happens. And then I will assign to 1, 2, no, 3 maintainers.
Pretty sure you'll get the bystander effect then.
2 maintainers and 1 GraphQL expert.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this had nothing to do with GraphQL, by the way, right? It's just...
But anyways, just in case.
Yeah. So
this was super educational. This is a really interesting way of, I don't think about this problem a lot, so I appreciate you bringing up this issue.
Yeah, let's all thank Nico for
But I mean, the bundle analysis tool that gave me a stroke, human. Significant growth, 25%. I added 3 utilities, like 300 lines a mark. Like, what did I do now?
We're not just, brushing past that. That was good reading the error messages.
When we reduced our main.js bundle size, it seems like GraphQL and Apollo and GraphQL and related dependencies get included multiple times into different chunks.
You have a small typo in too. Tino.
No, this is a new into where you can directly define URLs and the dependencies.
I see.
Into different chunks. By manually defining GraphQL chunk, we can increase cacheability.
So let me ask you.
Is that a word?
Yeah, you can throw ility onto anything.
Yeah. So, for example, IP ability, right? The ability to be an IP.
So let me ask you another question of just while we're talking about this problem. Let's say someone sees that, I increased the bundle size, I can improve things by adding a chunk, and they're just kind of doing this on their own. They create an MR that decides to chunk things based on a certain test, and it hits a maintainer's desk that doesn't necessarily know, I don't really have a whole lot of expertise here. Is this something that we should say, please look for a domain expert review on to make sure we're chunking these things correctly, or does that make sense?
I think, if you don't know about the stuff as a maintainer, that's completely fine because you don't know everything. So yes, asking for an expert would be good. It would also be good maybe to raise awareness of this session or what we've done here in the maintainer call so that people learn about it. And then, I think we need to educate folks. And I don't know, this is a problem that I had in previous companies and so on, is like this understanding of how our assets are delivered, right? Not everybody needs 100% of understanding of that, but and cacheability and stuff, these are all things, and there are multiple considerations here, because if it's a whole, basically all this Apollo stuff in GraphQL always comes together in one chunk, right? While in other cases, it might not have made sense. For example, with GitLab UI, we don't want to deliver one big GitLab UI chunk all the time because some of the GitLab UI components like charts are rather large, and we'd rather have, the total of GitLab UI is rather large, but the individual stuff that's loaded on pages is rather tiny, right? But here, the downside is really oh gosh, in I don't know how many these are, but we basically loaded it 20 times, right? In an ideal world, and that would be amazing, but I don't know how much processing power and understanding it takes, we would have each dependency exactly once, somehow, in this view. But yeah, I don't know how to achieve it. And because on the other side, like, you don't want to create, like, send down 500 JavaScript files, right?
Yeah.
And
Plus, if you're pinging and I don't know how accurate this is, but like that does mean that you now have one point of failure.
yeah.
And the chances that it's going to fail if I hit it 20 times is less than the chances it's going to fail if I hit it 500 times. So I do think that there is a motivation for not chunking all the things, but this kind of iterative approach of like, here's an opportunity, let's take it. That makes a lot of sense. I think one thing that would be really helpful is improving the visibility of the diffs here. If I had like even if, I don't know if we can do this, but create see you later, Nico. I know we're at time, so if you got to hop off.
Yeah.
But if we could create, I'd like to see, like, for every chunk, what was the size difference? Like, anytime we're doing an MR, every chunk, here's the new chunks that were added, and like, here's the size differences. And if that could be in a chart, that would be beautiful. But even if it's just diffing two files, that would be kind of helpful as a reviewer, just to have awareness of what's
definitely. And it's just something that we need to improve upon. And to be honest, I think for maintainers, you also need to think about what is changing, right?
See you, Natalia. Thanks for hopping on.
So now we can say the most important things at the end, just between the two of us. No. So for example, one example that I want to give is like, and this is what I mentioned earlier, right? Even if that page grew by 400 kilobyte, and it's because, I don't know, someone added a new dependency that, contains the color blue 500 times, it's not that bad, because it's a root. Projects, settings, CI/CD show. You visit that root 5 times a year.
Yeah.
Balsamic viewer is gargantuan. PDF viewers are gargantuan, but it's not a use case that someone is like, hey, I review thousands of PDF files all day with GitLab, right?
No.
But if suddenly the issues list page and the merge request page increase by 100 megabytes, that's like really bad. And it's also, and this is actually, merge request show is 7.31 megabytes.
But that can, like, right, and that can easily happen though. The more we should be doing this, like, the more we start sharing code and like consolidating our experience, like, hey, and we're even talking from IDE, like, okay, can we do like an editing experience in the merge request using Monaco, like.
But then you should load Monaco and keep the size small. Right. Then you should load Monaco when the user requests it, right? For example, we actually have some code in there for resolving merge conflicts, and I think the code for resolving merge conflicts is loaded every time. You don't need to resolve merge conflicts every time in the UI, right? Or like these e-chart stuff. Like we have these nice little charts in merge request, right? That, and e-charts is ridiculously large. It's like, look right now, I'm not seeing one single chart. Why did I load e-charts? There's not like one little chart on this page here, right?
And that some of those can be solved by doing like async imports.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. That's that's a good point. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, this is like everything. We should try to make stuff async and defer it every time a user doesn't need it when they directly land on that page, right? So for example, if you think about it theoretically, GitLab flavored Markdown, just needs to be loaded, once a user actually focuses this thing, or we can maybe defer the loading a little bit, because you're not like bam and immediately can enter something, right?
Yeah, and that only takes effect when you're previewing something too, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, GitLab flavored Markdown is also the auto completion and stuff.
Oh, right. No, that's a good point. Well, hey, so much praise for setting these watcher things up, because this is so off my radar of thinking of like maintainability and sharing code, and that's a good thing. Balancing with this is a huge deal, and so this is awesome that we have the bells going off when things do happen. That's
the cool thing is, and actually I thought about it, we actually record the bundle size on master.
Mhm.
And I wanted to build a pipeline that runs once a week that just, does a comparison to the previous result from the previous week. And then we could just be like, hey, oh, look what happened last week. And, because then it's okay if you miss something, or we can create issues for it, right? Yeah.
That's a good idea. I love these IP dashboards. Well, hey,
after the parental leave,
but I'm probably gonna try to motivate you to write it in Dino. Anyways, hey, cool. I'll catch you later, IP. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for hopping on.
No worries. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.